Hello, dear friends. This is the most lucid global geopolitical analysis of the current situation I have found. Opinion piece. Naughty countries. It's all planned. They are seeking independence. The positive side of the crisis. They want a multipolar world. We live in dangerous times. Solar storm warning. Our planet is under siege. The West is on the verge of collapse. Some currencies are committing suicide. We are on a slippery slope. Strange alliances of atheists and believers. Freedom has left the Western world. Controlled demolition of infrastructure. Chinese real estate company trades houses for wheat. Financial hallucination collides with reality. China and India buy the Russian oil we reject. Let's start. It is said that a world war has already started and that things will get worse from now on until the time of the financial restart. According to Gaius Baltar, the current world situation is like a giant jigsaw puzzle where the general public only sees a small part of the whole picture. Why is all this happening and why is it happening now? The West has been keeping the pressure on the whole world for decades. Among the countries under pressure are Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Libya, Syria, Serbia, Thailand, Iran, India and Hungary. One has to wonder why conservative and religious countries like Russia or Iran would ally themselves with the atheist communists in Cuba and Venezuela. What all these countries have in common is their desire to run their own affairs, to be independent countries. There is a struggle between two possible futures: a multipolar world where there are several centers of power in the world, and a unipolar world where the West rules the world. Most Western countries have a debt that could only be paid off by selling the whole country and everything in it. The panic of our landlords is understandable, because we can no longer maintain our standard of living because of the rising debt. The debt is reaching beyond what we own as collateral, and our currencies are about to become worthless. We will no longer be able to get things for free from the rest of the world or pay off our debt. The whole West would be about to go bankrupt and our standard of living would be about to fall. We see only two scenarios. In the first scenario, most countries in the West and everything and everyone within them goes bankrupt and would erase the debt by dictate. This would also erase the wealth and political power of our owners. In the second scenario, our owners would take over the collateral during bankruptcy. The collateral is us and everything we own. It doesn't take a genius to figure out which scenario was chosen. No longer global. The Great Reset of Davos, now failed because it is no longer global, would be a mechanism for the seizure of all debt collateral, including our assets, the assets of your city or municipality, the assets of your state, and the most corporate assets not yet in the hands of our owners. This asset seizure mechanism has several components, but the most important are the following four: abolition of sovereignty, slowdown of the economy, asset harvesting, you will own nothing and be happy, and finally, oppression. To prevent an uprising from happening, a social control mechanism would be applied that would erase personal freedom, freedom of expression and privacy. It would also create absolute dependence of the individual on the state. Russia and China have resisted Western hegemony, That is enough to get them on the West's not list. The reason is that Russia and China can neither subjugate themselves through bankruptcy nor harvest their assets. They do not have much debt in Western countries, in Western currencies, which means that people who own the West through debt do not own Russia and China, and could not buy them through debt. The only way to acquire them is through regime change. Their governments must be weakened by any means, including economic sanctions, hence the use of Ukraine as a battering ram for Russia and Taiwan for China. If the Western economy falls and a large economic bloc does not participate in the fall, it would be a disaster for the West. This is what has fueled the situation we now find ourselves in to maintain its wealth and power. But the project is not going according to plan because it is Ukraine and the West that bleed. Without Russian resources, there is no European industry, and without industry, there are no taxes to pay for unemployment benefits, pensions, and all the refugees. The independent countries are creating a bloc to isolate themselves from the West. This isolation wouldn't only be economic, but also political and social. Their economic systems must be divorced from the West and become autonomous. Their cultures and history must be defended against Western influences and revisionism. This process seems to be underway. This will create a situation in which the West will have to transform itself positively in order to survive. The positive side. Every crisis has an invisible silver lining, and the financial crisis is no exception, because good and evil are intertwined in everything like light and shadow. Wells Fargo sees a recession looming next year. There is still a silver lining to the impending stock market downturn when the Wyckoff trading method is adopted to detect the telltale signs of a possible short-term rally. The Wyckoff method is an investment method or system that attempts, through the interpretation of market phases, to predict future price movements of a financial asset. The ultimate goal of this method is to generate long-term profits by investing in the stock market. Richard Wyckoff coined an investment method of system that allowed a priori to predict market movements with the analysis of past and current information based on the price and volume of a financial asset. Asset management stocks have been hit hard this year by the massive market sell-off, falling 35 to 45%, almost double the fall in the S&P 500. However, even in this context of deterioration, some stocks look attractive. The shares of many asset managers are trading at up to 10 times projected 2022 earnings and have a yield of 3 to 5%. The current market development would be similar to the 2008 global financial crisis in terms of both price structure and market rotation sequence. When the upside fails along the way, or even early on, the S&P 500 is likely to go into market crash mode, similar to the 2008 global financial crisis. Richard DeMille Wyckoff was a stock market investor who developed a method of analyzing financial markets. Wyckoff developed and applied his method by introducing into stock analysis the interactions between volume and the maximum and minimum range of price movement for a given time frame. In this sense, he has he was the father of the modern theory of volume analysis for stock market investment and the basis of today's modern tools such as order flow, order book, and market profile. As part of his philanthropic side, Wyckoff devoted part of his life to teaching, to which he devoted himself with passion, in which he systematized his method of investment and speculation, and deepened the use of volume as an important part of the technical analysis of stocks, commodities, and bonds. Wild things, bizarre things. Solar storm warning. A huge sunspot that doubled in size in a 24-hour period is now directly in front of the Earth, meaning a large solar flare could hit the planet. The sunspot, known as AR 3038, doubled in size between Sunday and Monday night. Now it has turned towards Earth, raising concerns that fast-moving solar winds could hurl itself towards the blue planet. According to Y Plus 347, the solar storm would be a cover story to blow up the stock markets. But this is only an opinion. Turkey. Wheat fields are burning simultaneously in Tekirdağ, Bursa, Diyarbakir, Mardin, Gaziantep, Kanakkale, and Osmaniye. Why are the Ministry of Agriculture and TV channels silent? Are you still wondering if there is a planned food shortage? About 100 companies in the food industry have burnt down in the US since the beginning of 2021. A fire ripped through a pizza factory in Wisconsin on Monday. In Kazakhstan, mysterious deaths of livestock and poultry have been observed for several months, and no one can find a specific reason. Agorers. We live in dangerous times, according to John Mearsheimer. The most dangerous state of economic grief may be the next. We are now at the bottom of a slippery slope, according to Claban. This phrase is in quotes. Modern slavery is more rampant than you might think. Gold is only one part of the many pieces of the plan to change the financial system. Will this be the excuse to push digital dollars? According to Jordan Shatter, Biden's economy is collapsing as hard as his bicycle. Kim.com says a major global collapse is coming. A stagflationary collapse has arrived, according to economist Brandon Smith. Coca-Cola CEO says a very painful macroeconomic period lies ahead. Bitcoin rises 0.9% to over $20,000. Collapse. Stock market crash. Workers who save money for retirement and spend it responsibly but expect only one thing from the government in return, that it works efficiently and honestly. Nothing happens by accident. To the innocent and ignorant, it must seem as if we are in the middle of a perfect storm. A never-ending nightmare of chaos, confusion, bad luck and disaster. Financial hallucination collides with reality, according to Benjamin Fulford. No matter how hard you try to avoid reality, it will eventually catch up with you. This is the lesson that privately owned Western central banks are learning now, that their fiat money hallucination is crashing into the real world. The collapse of financial markets seen recently is not ordinary market move. It is the collapse of a system. Paralysis. Trains and planes stopped. Cars too expensive to use. Roads now for cyclists. Some world currencies are committing suicide according to the St. Petersburg Forum. Political elites accept whatever they are told from above, causing damage to their own population and their own economy according to such a fall. Our planet is under siege according to the Adapt 2030 channel. International disconnection of energy, food and economy. Manipulated markets with insider trading. Shutting down the key infrastructure and eliminating quality of life for the majority. Controlled demolition of food and energy infrastructure according to Mike Adams. Educational assault. An unprecedented assault on the minds and morals of the young marks the final failure of the totalitarian dream. In quotes, don't underestimate how evil or determined they are, say Trenis Evans and Juan Osavin. USA. A plane with 126 passengers on board catches fire after landing in Miami, Florida. Airlines pledge to stabilize a difficult recovery. Airlines want oil companies to speed up production of alternative fuels. Wheat falls due to harvest pressure. Corn and soybeans also fall. Bond yields rise as stocks rise on recession fears. Congress passes a bill to spread negative news about China. General Flynn says governors must take action to defend their border against the federal government's open borders policy. Chevron says Biden is trying to impose barriers to energy supply. Biden's lawyer resigns. Dana Rimas, Joe Biden's top lawyer, abruptly resigned amid the trouble surrounding her son. Soros is trying to suppress free speech on talk radio. He's trying to buy 18 Spanish-language radio stations in the US. The Fourth Reich, not the Third. Jim Marrs has gathered evidence of the effort over the last 60 years to bring in a form of national socialism, essentially creating a new empire. Freedom has left the Western world. Paul Craig Roberts writes that there is not a single country that believes in freedom and human rights. Every democracy is willing to coerce its citizens just as dictatorships do. Elon Musk plans to vote for Ron DeSantis in the 2024 election. Europe. Strong rallies in Wall Street futures boost Europe. European stocks continue to rise, but recession risk looms. European Union soft wheat exports rise to 26.68 million tons. German authorities prepare to activate the alarm phase of the National Gas Emergency Plan. The European Union extends sanctions against Russia for its annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol for another year. Ukrainians are driving up the number of asylum applications in the European Union. Spain. A PP with an absolute majority in Andalusia dodges governing with Vox. The Spanish stock market falls by 0.61%, hit by the fall in the electricity sector. Electricity companies fall 2.6% on the stock market after being warned of the tax surcharge. BlackRock, the big investor in Spanish banks, wants even more. Japan plans a summit with South Korea, Australia and New Zealand in Madrid. The yen falls to a new 24-year low against the dollar. Americas. Ecuador marks a week of protests with the first protester dead. Police in Ecuador crack down on indigenous protesters advancing towards Quito to protest against Guillermo Lasso. The indigenous march bursts into Quito, overriding the state of emergency. 2 Jesuits are martyred inside a church in Chihuahua, Mexico. The Congress of El Salvador plans to approve another extension of the state of emergency. Colombian markets plunge on fears of Petro's election. Latin America's most efficient power plant to supply energy to Peru. The Bank of Brazil will continue to raise interest rates to curb inflation. China. A Chinese real estate company trades houses for wheat. China distances itself from the Fed by keeping its interest rates unchanged. China and India buy Russian oil that the West doesn't want. China imports of Russian oil soared to a record in May. China pounces on cheap Russian oil as Western supplies dry up. Russia once again becomes China's largest crude oil supplier. Russia overtakes Saudi Arabia as China's largest oil supplier. China's export of alumina to cover Russian shortages soars. US sanctions helped China boost its ship manufacturing industry. Chinese military successfully intercepts a ballistic missile during a test. China, the power of the community. How can a country care for tens of millions of elderly people, hundreds of thousands of volunteers, help mediate disputes, take care of the elderly, or risk their health on a daily basis? China, despite its huge population, enjoys harmony in its society. State authoritarianism is a different matter. Asia. Stocks in Asia are poised for relief amid the falling dollar. Asian markets mostly fall ahead of the US holiday. 5.2 magnitude earthquake off Japan's northwest coast with no tsunami warning. Tourists are stranded on a high-altitude cable car in India, and some of them climb down a rope during the rescue. An Indian policeman saves an elderly woman just before a train speeds past. Airbus and Qantas to invest in biofuel development in Australia. Middle East. Saudi Arabia's oil exports reached their highest level in 2 years. Saudi stocks erase years' gains as oil plummets. The Israeli government decides to dissolve parliament and bring forward elections. Israel will hold its 5th elections in just over 3 years. Israel says it is building the Middle East Air Defense Alliance. Africa. The United Nations calls for the mobilization of the parties to the conflict in Congo. The Algerian Minister of Energy takes up the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline with Nigeria. Nigeria blocks repatriation of $450 million in foreign airline revenues. Chinese copper and cobalt mine in Congo faces political obstacles. Rubber is a major driver of deforestation. NGO warns. Ukraine. The center of Donetsk is under heavy shelling. Ukraine hits Crimean oil drilling platform. Moscow says there will be overwhelming retaliation. Russian troops release Ukrainian paramedic Yulia Payevska, alias Tyra. Donbass report heavy losses from foreign mercenaries fighting for Kiev. Ukraine attacked Crimean oil rigs, according to pro-Russian regional chief. Ukraine to display destroy Russian tanks in Europe. The United Nations negotiates the unblocking of Ukraine's food supplies. Poland speeds up the passage of grain trucks from Ukraine. Will there be a cap in Ukraine? Russia. Southern Russia starts barley harvest with high yields. The first Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile will enter service later this year. Russia declares that only military force will decide the conflict in Ukraine, according to Sorchafal. The conflict in Ukraine is Russia's confrontation with the West, and is not a conflict between Moscow and Kiev, according to Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik. Lithuania stops rail service to Kaliningrad. This scenario must be avoided at all costs. Panic buying in Kaliningrad as Lithuania cuts off Russian railway. Russia prepares to punish Lithuania from its blockade of Kaliningrad. Putin would not use nuclear weapons unless attacked first. Putin said, "They are not even human." Russia attacks the US in Syria. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.